suddenly.
So we'll go ahead and get started since it is 8 o'clock. Thank you guys for joining us for this session on the National MBA Career Fairs and just a brief overview on some of the options that you have as students that you could attend this year. And we also have a couple panelists. And so we're excited to walk through these slides with you and hopefully have some of your questions answered. So just some quick introductions. My name is Kathleen Rawl. I'm one of the MBA coaches in the Career Management Center, and I work specifically with students who are thinking about careers in marketing and tech. And then Sandy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Kinnett. I'm one of the MBA coaches for the full-time MBA students as well. The areas that I work with are specifically healthcare, HOP, and operations. I also work with MBA peer coach program as well, and I'm excited to be with you all for the next 45 minutes or so.
Great. And then we have a couple of panelists with us as well. They might not all be here just yet, but I know Brandon, you're here. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing this summer and also what you attended.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brandon Moshe. I just finished up my first year at Owen. I'm currently doing a consulting internship at LEK Consulting in Boston. Prior to Owen, I was in the Army. So this past fall, I attended the MBA Veterans Conference in Atlanta.
Great. Thank you. And then Kian or Abhishek, I'm not sure if you're on the call yet, but if you are, want to introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Hey, everybody, my name is Abhishek. I'm an international student here from India. I was a software engineer before my MBA, and at Optum, I'm specializing in strategy and operations and analytics. And this summer, I'm interning at the Office of Executive Education at Vanderbilt, helping them build a new business model. And I'm really excited to be here. And this fall, I attended ROMBA.
Great. Thank you. And Kian, I think you're here as well. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I just got to the office. My name is Kian Thomas. I attended National Black last year. I just finished my first year at my MBA, and right now I'm interning at Pfizer in New York City as a marketing associate.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I know you're busy with your internships this summer, but really appreciate your help. So Sandy and I will go through a couple of slides, but if you all have insights to share, feel free to just pop in and interrupt us. And then at the end, we'll kind of open it up to Q&A for you all. So if anyone has any questions on the attendee side, if you have any questions, you can drop those in the chat or you can hold those until the end, but we'll have plenty of time to get to your questions, hopefully. So, all right, so just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We want to review some of the bigger national career fairs that you have the option to attend. And, we can't tell you, yes, you should, or no, you should not attend, but we'll hopefully give you some good parameters and some things to think about as you make your decision. And go through some of the costs and details, and then think about how you would prepare so that you can put your best foot forward as a candidate should you decide to attend one of these in the fall. And then we'll switch over to our panels. So just a quick overview. I'm sure you've seen this slide before, but the timeline is always getting earlier and earlier for prep for internships. So the National Career Fairs typically happen in early fall. So we'll go through the details of those, but as you can see, some of these happen quite early. And so we want you to start thinking about that now, should you decide to go. For National Black, for example, their job board just opened up on July 1st. So things are already moving with that. So we want you to be prepared of the timeline and think about how this might fit into what your fall will look like and what you're recruiting for as well. So just kind of a big picture overview here. You can look at a couple of pictures that we have. The top one is kind of what it looks like to be at, I think that was from National Black last year. And the bottom picture is a group of students who attended National Black last year. So these career fairs are large scale typically, and they're sponsored by large organizations, and they're for specifically MBA recruiting. A lot of these companies are hiring MBA internship positions and even full-time positions as well. So sometimes second years will attend. But they're doing so in multiple business functions. There are some fairs that you might expect more focused in certain functional areas, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But generally they're pretty inclusive, I would say. You know, sometimes they are targeted towards a specific group that they're promoting, but they're also open to a lot of students as well. And this is all a part of their early fall recruiting strategy. So they're trying to jump the timelines a bit and get ahead of the game and really recruit top talent. That's why they happen typically September, October timeframe. A lot of what we hear from students attending is that this is like just really a lot. It can be overwhelming. I'm sure you'll hear that about this from our 3 students on the panel today, but it kind of can feel like a trade show almost. Like they happen in these large convention center halls. There's, you know, up to sometimes 300 companies attending, and you're walking around and you're just sort of overwhelmed. So that's why we want you to be prepared going in so that you're not totally just out of your element, and so that you can have a little bit of a game plan and know what to expect going into these. A lot of these companies or a lot of these organizations will host sometimes interviews beforehand, and so they'll have a job board, so they'll post opportunities beforehand. So you might actually have an interview prior to the career fair itself, and I think some of our attendees, our panelists, can speak to that as well. So it's not just to happen just at the career fair, but sometimes it will happen leading up to it, and sometimes it will happen. The interviews can happen after the fact. I know one student, for example, who attended a conference in the summer last year, and started the networking process at the conference, and then interviewed in January and didn't get an offer until March or April, but it was all part of that timeline. So sometimes offers are made at the conference, sometimes interviews happen beforehand. So there's a kind of a wide spectrum of how this can work. So kind of every company, every career fair does it a little bit differently. And additionally, there's also like sometimes you'll walk up, meet a recruiter, hand them your resume, and they'll say, hey, we'd like to interview you tomorrow, right? So a lot can happen in a little bit of time. And many of the companies will also host networking receptions. So in addition to having the opportunity to interview for these positions, you can also get a lot of networking under your belt at these national career fairs. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about each of these now. So this is kind of the snapshot of the 5 that we're going to talk about today. So National Black happens, I believe, is the earliest one, happening in mid-September. Their target is for all Black MBAs, but it's actually open to all students. The biggest thing that I would say for all of these career fairs is that you'll want to do your research in advance. So hopefully you have a little bit of an idea of the type of recruiting you'd like to do in the fall, or maybe you've got a couple of ideas, and that's fine too. But what we would encourage you to do is go ahead and look at these websites before you register to see which companies are attending and see, does this make sense for me? Are my target companies on here, or are they not going to be attending? So it's really important for you to do your research in advance and make sure that this is the right fit for you. So the National Black happens in Washington, D.C. The Grace Hopper Conference is a little bit more targeted towards those who are on the data and analytics side, I would say. We have a lot of our data science students usually attend that. MBA Veterans is in Atlanta again, and that's in October. And that one is clearly targeted towards veterans. And then PROSPANICA is open. Their target is for Hispanic MBAs, but it's open to all. And then ROMBA, their target is LGBT business students, specifically MBA students. And I believe that in the past they've been open to allies as well, and I don't think that's the case anymore. So you can see the ones that are starred, there's a registration discount code. So you can get that from us. It's also in the Teams channel that we've shared, but I will be happy to send that to all of you. I'll drop it in the chat later as well. So you can see all those discount codes in case you're thinking about registering for any of these. So this is sort of a big picture, high level overview. So the next question would be like, okay, so I've got 1 or maybe 2 that I'm thinking about, maybe 1 that I'm thinking about attending. Should I go? Is it the right fit for me? So again, we can't decide for you, but hopefully this visual will kind of help you tease out some of that. So I would say, yes, you should consider attending one of these conferences if you are one of the target audience that they are looking for. If you're looking for marketing, especially brand management, National Black would be a great place. There's a lot of large brands that recruit at that conference. If you're thinking about healthcare, especially pharma, biotech, that's another big thing for National Black. And then also for all of these, I would say if your target companies are attending, it might be good for you to think about attending. We would say maybe possibly kind of think about it if you are interested in leadership development programs. Those are sometimes not as widely recruited at these national career fairs. If you're thinking about recruiting in tech, it can be kind of hit or miss. Again, that's where you want to look at the company list in advance and see who's recruiting and for what roles. Do your research. If you're really just wanting to practice networking, kind of get your feet wet there and like figure out what that is, I think that possibly this could be a really good thing for you to do. And then probably not attend one of these if you are interested in investment banking. This is not where they're going to be recruiting. If you're thinking about consulting, with the exception maybe of ROMBA, we would say probably not the best place for you to be spending your time and money. And also, if you're really undecided still, I would say an event like this will be so overwhelming. So probably not the best use of your time and financial energies. So, I would say kind of think about this. If you're kind of on the fence, maybe if you're feeling really undecided, this is probably going to be just maybe too overwhelming for you. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful for you. This is a sample from the National Black website. So there were 193 companies registered as of June 20th. So probably many more than that by now. But what you can do now is go into all of these organization websites and look at their job boards or just see which companies are going to be attending. And that can help you decide, oh man, all of, my top 5 companies are all going to be there. I should be there. Or man, a lot of these companies I've never heard of before, or like, they're not really the type of roles that I'm looking for. So maybe it's not the best fit, or maybe it's not the best use of my time. So the other thing to think about too is that for these, a lot of these conferences, you will have to miss class. And so it's on you as a student to communicate that with your professor should you decide to go to one of these conferences and miss class. And then that would be your responsibility to communicate that with your professor and make sure that any deadlines or homework that you miss, that you're taking care of that on your own time. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandy now to take us through the rest of the slides.
Great. Thanks, Kathleen. So as Kathleen mentioned, you are making an investment when you decide to go to one of these conferences. And so one thing to keep in mind also is the cost associated with each, just so that you can budget from your own personal perspective. So we've listed kind of the cost, and as Kathleen mentioned, with several of the conferences, there are ON discounts. And so you can use those to get a discount off of the registration fee, which I would highly recommend. And we'll put these slides up. We'll also message these codes in Teams so that you have them readily handy if you, at the point when you register. So when you're budgeting for a conference, in addition to the cost of also the registration, you also have to consider travel. And you also have to consider, where you're going to stay, the lodging. A lot of times students, if it's within driving distance, you'll loop up with a couple of people. Brandon, I don't know if when you were at MBA Veterans, since it was in Atlanta, if you coordinated with people, but a lot of people will share a hotel room or, make sure that they travel together if it's in driving distance. But those are other costs kind of associated that you need to think about before. And we're just kind of putting it out there so that you are aware as you're planning that the costs can get higher than just that registration cost. And those are just out-of-pocket expenses for a student to attend. So in terms of preparing this summer, if you're thinking about, what can I do? I'm thinking about attending a conference. I think it would be a great experience because I'll have access to, all these different companies, and I'm in the target audience, or in, I'm definitely doing marketing. So National Black seems like a great opportunity for me to connect with CPG companies. Again, I would encourage you to just visit the conference website and start to really get familiar with the companies that will be in attendance. Hopefully you all have attended a small group and have kind of the instructions to get your resume in the Owen template, and you've set up a one-on-one appointment with a CMC coach to have your resume in the Owen format and get some feedback on that. And just being aware of when the registration dates are would be something I would, definitely have on your calendar. To prepare your candidacy. So there will be some programming in place, like once school starts for those earlier events, but really working with your CMC coach to, if you're planning on going, just to make sure you have your elevator pitch down. You've connected with your second year MBA peer coach to kind of talk through different recruiting strategies and approaches, and then connecting with other second year students that attended these conferences, just so you feel a little bit more prepared going into that process. And then we will also, continue to send information out about the dates and everything as well. As you start to think about the conference itself, you're really wanting to kind of narrow in and develop your target list of companies. I know, like for National Black, there's so many companies there at that event that it can be helpful to kind of identify maybe like your top companies that you want to make sure you connect with at the event. And then maybe you have some companies that are like warm-up companies that you're interested in, but you're going to be connecting with them. The stakes aren't as high because they're not as high on your list. So just making sure you have some sort of strategy going into those events. You're doing your company research. And then, as Kathleen mentioned, a lot of these conferences do have active job boards. So it's very feasible that you could be applying for internships before the conference, for interviews at the conference as well. So working with us on getting your cover letter if necessary, and making sure your resume is in a good spot for those applications. So in terms of conference communications, again, make sure you're in the habit of checking the CMC teams. We do have a career channel, or a channel for National Career Fairs. So we'll be sending any updated information about the conferences through that means. So make sure that you're checking that. I think we've already sent out the code for MBA veterans, and Kathleen, you've sent out the code for National Black. Okay. So check the CMC Microsoft Teams, National Career Fairs channel for those. And yeah, in 1220, all of the preparation events that we'll have, you'll start to see that in the events section in 1220, some of the workshops and the programming that we'll do. So make sure you're checking that. And then we'll also build a resume book for these particular events as well. So just keep an eye out on communications from our team for the conferences specifically. Okay, so now we are at the student panel portion. I know I saw one question come in through the chat, but really quickly, Brandon, Kian, Abhishek, any comments or feedback on the information we covered, or do you want to go straight into questions?
I think for me, I think I'll just echo really quickly a few things that were kind of said, and I think for the vet specific, and I'm sure Kian and Abhishek will say something similar about the conferences they attended, is you really want to do like your work up front. I know specifically for the MBA vets, it didn't play out exactly how we thought it would, in the sense that there was a lot of pre-contact a lot of people had with different companies and recruiters there, that went a long way and paid dividends at the conference. And I think it's important, probably at every conference, but specifically for the vet conference, to really do your homework on the companies that are going to be there and reach out early, and send them your resumes, have your resumes ready to go, but really put in the work up front. So when you do go to these conferences, it's not the first time maybe you're talking to a lot of these people. It's maybe the second or third time. And that goes a long way with getting those kind of spot interviews or those coffee chats or whatever it looks like. So I think it's important heading into any of these conferences is to really be prepared to up front and make sure that these conversations that you want to have, start before the conference. I think that was something I learned coming out of the MBA event conference specifically.
Awesome.
I would just like to add two things here, especially if you're an international student thinking of going to these conferences. When you think about, making a list of target companies, keep in mind the companies who sponsor, and a lot of the big companies who sponsor do end up going to these conferences. So, definitely prioritize companies that sponsor so that you talk to them first and then go to other companies that may or may not sponsor, right? So that's number one. Second is a lot of these companies who are going to be at the conferences, they have uh, conference level webinars or online events. For example, I remember that a lot of the consulting companies who were at the ROMBA had some pre-ROMBA online events. So you just had to sign up with them, and then you are also invited for coffee chats or dinners or lunch. So definitely be mindful of these events as well. So how do you research about these companies and these free conference, company specific events? The way you do that is to go to these companies' websites and see if there is a specific event that you can sign up for.
Then I was just going to add one more thing. I think Sandy did say it, specifically for National Black, there's so many companies and it's so huge. Like you have to do your due diligence up front. And I remember a second year student who's now graduated, she told me that she had like a top 10 list of companies that she wanted and like needed to get to. And then she had 10 that was a maybe, because at National Black, it's just impossible to hit every single company. And also certain companies have longer lines. I remember I stayed in a line for an hour and a half to talk to Ford just for them to say that they actually don't have a marketing internship. So doing your due diligence up front, knowing what jobs they have, and then trying to figure out, like Apple always packs. Certain companies, you're going to have to wait in line for about 2 hours to talk to a recruiter, and it's going to be really quick. And other companies, the lines are much quicker. I think I talked to a few healthcare companies like the second I got up there. So just really make sure to do your due diligence and plan out your must companies and then your maybe companies. And then just know that you might not hit all your companies that you do want to get to.
That's great. Thanks, y'all. There's a question in the chat. Do these fairs clash with Owen's other tracks, such as the consulting track? So Brandon, I believe that we had that conflict last year with MBA veterans, I believe is the one conflict for that. Most of the other fairs do not conflict with the consulting track. Is going to be the first like Thursday, Friday of the immersion week or the break between mod 1 and mod 2. And so that does conflict with MBA veterans specifically. But Brandon, I can't remember. I feel like some of the vets decided to do MBA veterans and some of the vets decided to only do the consulting track. But do you want to talk a little bit about what some of your classmates did with that?
Yeah, I think if I had to make a recommendation on which to do if they do conflict again, which they might. If you're a vet, I would go to the vet conference. That's just my opinion. I think the consulting trek of those people who I talked to, they had a really good time and it was a good experience, and they learned a lot. But I think this is specifically the MBA Vets Conference is the only Vets Conference, and year over year, it's getting bigger and bigger. It's getting better and better. I talked to a lot of people who were at the conference who said last year's was the best ever. And it's just so much different and it's growing. So I think if you're a vet, that's really the event you want to be at. I think, I ended up with a consulting internship. I didn't go on the consulting track, so it's not a must, but I do know that I had a lot of good opportunities come out of the vets conference. Also made a lot of good connections there as well. So I think specifically for vets, it's I would recommend going to that conference versus the consulting track.
Awesome. Thank you. There's another question in the chat. Maybe Abhishek and Brandon, you all can talk through this. Is it beneficial for students looking for LDP roles? Like in your experience, did you feel like a lot of companies that had LDPs were there? You know, marketing, it's a given to go to these conferences. But in y'all's opinion and experience, what did you feel like for LDPs?
I think for National Black, there are a lot of LDPs because I feel like a lot of healthcare companies have LDPs from like different levels. Like I'm at Pfizer and I'm in a marketing rotational program if I come back next year. But they also have finance. And then I think a lot of healthcare companies do have LDP roles and they're all at National Black. And I knew a few other students that were looking specifically for LDPs that went to National Black and they did find them. So I think National Black does have a lot of like LDP roles within companies, but I do agree that there was hardly any consulting companies there, and I don't think there was like any banks. But LDPs, yes, but you do have to like go through the list of all the companies that are going to be at National Black and kind of do like your research, because they don't advertise them, so you kind of have to go up there and know what you're asking for when you talk to the recruiters.
Similarly at ROMBA, I did not see a lot of LDP roles last year. There were a lot of consulting, tech, even banks, but not a lot of LDPs.
Yeah, at the vet conference, there actually was quite a few. Some companies had a couple different, versions of it. And myself specifically, I actually got an LDP offer out of the vet conference itself. So they do exist, at least at the vet conference as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it kind of goes back to, doing some research on what LDPs am I targeting just in general for my internship search strategy, what LDPs are going to be like pipelines through Owen, and that's using that where students went to work Excel spreadsheet to kind of get a good understanding of where the traction is, like from a campus recruiting perspective, identifying other LDPs that you might be interested, and then kind of taking a look at the list of companies that will be in attendance at the career fair and making that decision to see if, it's a good investment that you're going to get to connect with, that it's going to be enough upside to connect with enough companies to make it worth it. But doing that company research on the front end is a really good investment of time to help you make a more informed decision. There's another question. Will the MBA Veterans Conference conflict with the Healthcare Immersion Week? I'll answer this. So
Yeah.
I think last year it did. I have recently emailed Ranga and Birch to see when those dates are specifically set, because again, I think it's going to take place in the same time frame. Birch is the point of contact for Healthcare Immersion Week, and he has not set the dates specifically yet. So that's kind of TBD. Which is, that's again, like kind of an unfortunate conflict, because my guess is it will run, overlap again this year. But I know as a second year student, you can also do Healthcare Immersion Week as well. So I think that that's something just to kind of table right now until we have the specific dates and time frame for Healthcare Immersion, which my guess they'll probably know that by the time the healthcare symposium takes place in the first few weeks of school. I will add with the Veterans Conference, and Brandon, I don't know if you have any feedback on this, like the Veterans Conference takes place in person. It's huge. There are tons of companies there. It's 2 days. And then there's like a virtual career fair a week afterwards. I don't know if, Brandon, you had any of your classmates attend that virtual piece of the MBA Veterans Career Fair. Any thoughts on that?
I don't think, to my knowledge, I think we maybe had maybe had one who had to miss the conference for something unrelated to, immersion weeks, but I think we might have had one. But I do know that it really is a virtual version of the vet conference. I've heard very good things about how well it's run in terms of being able to get people connected and still network. And so I think if you do have to, decide between an immersion week or the vets conference, and you really, really want to go to, the healthcare immersion week, you can still make up the vet conference on the back end with that virtual, and it's still a really good opportunity. I would say the only thing I would do there is, even double down even more on making sure you make contact with these companies ahead of time. And so when it comes time to do those virtual connections, it might be a little bit easier and you can be a little more targeted. So it might take a little more work up front to balance that. But there is that virtual option that I know is hugely successful. I think they had nearly as many people enroll in the virtual as they did in the conference, which is kind of crazy because the conference was huge. But I do know that is, a really good option for those who do have to miss the vet conference.
Great questions. Thank you. Okay, Mayank, do the participating companies at these conferences put up the roles too on the conference website for which they are open in terms of internship or full-time roles? Or do we get to know only after visiting their booth at the conference? I will answer this question and then kind of pass it to the panel. So it's kind of a combination. In my experience, it's a combination of some companies will post their opportunities prior to the conference and fill their interview slots up before the conference so that they're just doing interviews. They may have some people at their booth, but their interview schedule is for the most part full. Some companies will do some of that, but then also leave slots for candidates that they're meeting at the conference. And so I think you have to prepare for both, looking ahead of time to apply to those opportunities that you're interested in and potentially getting interviews scheduled before the conference, but also being prepared to interview 2 hours from the time that you're having a conversation with someone at the booth, if they feel like you're a good potential candidate for their internship program. But Brandon, Abhishek, Kian, what are your thoughts on how companies approach that process?
I think so for the vet conference specifically, they do got like a portal that you can see all of the job postings and all the companies going, and there's even some small ways to connect within their portal. In my experience, most of the companies were hiring workers. Conference, and I think most companies are pretty transparent what they're recruiting for. And one thing I did notice as well, companies will have multiple opportunities. They won't post everything as well because they're trying to recruit for specific things.
Sandy, you're muted.
Abhishek or Kian, what are your thoughts on kind of the way companies manage the job board versus meeting candidates in person on the fly and interviewing?
I'm going to say definitely a mix. Like you said, Sandy, I think there were some companies, I knew some people who had interviews lined up 2 weeks before National Black even started. And they already had their kind of schedule already set out. And I applied for some positions later, even at the conference, after speaking to some of the companies that I thought were really interesting, and then had an interview set up the next day. So it is a lot of doing work on the forefront, but you might see a company that you're hey, let me just practice some networking, go talk to them, and they like their company sounds amazing, their position sounds great. You apply for it right then and there, and they're like, yeah, let's set up an interview tomorrow. So it is a lot of it's like a half and half split, in my opinion, at least at National Black.
Yeah, similarly at ROMBA as well. So with ROMBA, when you register for the conference, you are invited to sign up for a job board which is called Grad Leaders. And in Grad Leaders, you drop your resume. You're also asked the specific function you're recruiting for, right? So let's say my friend who went there, he was recruiting for brand management and HR. So at that time, companies who were recruiting for brand management and HR, they were doing on-conference interviews. So he was invited for that. But let's say for tech and consulting, which I was looking for, they were not uh, doing on conference interviews for these functions. I was not invited for these interviews. Although there were I think 1/4 of the companies who were part of the conference, they did have job postings on the job boards, but they had like a similar deadline than the regular deadline that's open to everybody, right? But then I did see some of the companies while I was speaking to them at the conference. I did find out that they do have some, an earlier deadline for conference attendees. Now, this is an information you find out when you do go and talk to these companies in their booth. So, like similar to all other conferences, it's a mix. For some companies, you get a sense of their jobs before you go to the conference. Or for some companies, you go and talk to them and then find out, okay, this is a particular job posting that's well suited for me, and I'm going to be applying for that.
Awesome. Any other questions from the attendees right now? One thing that I did want to kind of go over is like, what would you, I think we've hit on a lot of it, but in terms of like looking back, like what would you say are the best ways to prepare for success? And like, how should you manage your expectations if you are attending some of these larger scale career fairs?
I think for me, what I would say is, one, obviously know who's going to these fairs and who's going to be there, and if you can, try to figure out which recruiters specifically are going to be there and try to connect them as possible. I think the second is to make sure resume in these conferences and make sure that what you're handing out at these conferences is as good as possible. And then in terms of managing expectations, I would say experiences widely vary. I think people come away from these conferences with jobs or interviews, and other people come away with just a few connections. And I think that's part of the recruiting process, and it's a really long process. I'm sure, as Kian and Abhishek can attest to, it's long and it's arduous. So I think it's, no matter what your experience is, just know that there's a benefit to it, whether it's immediate or down the line.
I think one thing that everybody attendee should keep in mind is that it's going to be a lot overwhelming. So, you're going to be mentally and physically tired because, it's a day long or a 2 day long event. You'll be talking to people all throughout the day. So, stay hydrated and pack some snacks, have your lunches ready when you're attending these conferences. And, just like Brandon mentioned, the experience can vary from conferences to conferences, right? So you can, you can have a conference that has historically done on conference interviews, not doing on conference interviews this year, but that should not discourage you from attending these conferences, because you should, if you want to practice your networking skill, which was why I wanted to go to these conferences. And I knew that the chances of ROMBA conducting on-conference interviews last year was slim, but still I went ahead and attended the conference, and I'm so happy I did, because I was able to build many connections, and some of these connections even offered to do resume reviews, which does not happen often. So go with an open mind. If you are, let's say, recruiting for a specific business function, obviously talk to those companies who are recruiting for that business function. But once you're done talking to these companies, I would say definitely consider talking to other companies, because especially for international students, you want to be able to target a wide net. And the last thing that I wanted to mention here is that, these conferences offer a very, rare, once in a time access to these practitioners, right? Because if you're not going to these conferences, the way that you'll be networking to these practitioners is by, usually uh, sending out an outreach mail and then waiting for that to respond back and having coffee chats. But in these conferences, you'll have these practitioners literally waiting for you to, go to them and talk to them. So that's an advantage in itself.
I would just, I was just say, I would echo everything that Brandon and Abhishek said. Like, really manage your expectations. Some people will walk away with multiple offers, and some people won't. It is the recruiting process is really just like run your own race, and don't compare yourself to other people. And also, like Abhishek said, drink a lot of water. It is physically and mentally draining. I got sick after coming back from National Black because it was just so big. I lost my voice, just the amount of talking. I think other advice I would say, they've already mentioned, talk to your professors beforehand. A lot of them understand, like they do this every year. Like first years always go to these conferences, but making sure that you understand what assignments that you need to make up. I would say specifically with K-PACE, when for your communications class, you usually have a speech every week. So having that already managed is really helpful. And then I would also say work on your elevator pitches. I was kind of good with mine, but the amount of times I've had to give my elevator pitch there was a little insane. So really have that down, and maybe not exactly memorize, but at least get your bullet points. And then my last piece of advice is know the company. When I went to Johnson & Johnson, they wanted to know when the company was founded, their mission statement. So do some research on the background about the companies, because some of them will ask you, like, why did you choose this company? And if you don't know, it's kind of not a good sign. So yeah.
That's great. Great advice. Yes, definitely drink a lot of water. Now, I will mention at National Black and at MBA Veterans, and I believe at PROSPANICA too as well this year, like we will pay for an Owen booth. So it's nice to know that you have like your Owen headquarters, so to speak, so that, when you are needing to just take a minute, drink some water, maybe have a snack, see some of your classmates or second year students, and some of the staff. It's a good place to kind of home base.
Oh yeah, I would say that was definitely probably one of the best parts. Is like you'd make a loop and then you would stop at the booth and drink, and there was always snacks. Everybody would be sitting on the floor and be like, "Oh, I talked to this company. Like, you should go to this company." And then you would get up and do like another loop, and you're like,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember I saw somebody one time sleeping. They were just like, it's exhausting.
It is helpful too, because, when you have the booth and you're coming back and you're talking to some of the other classmates that are in attendance, they may have information about companies that maybe they're not interested in that, maybe you are. And so it's a lot of good like information sharing and tips and everything. So I think this one picture on this slide is from the Owen booth. I think maybe, was that at National Black, Kathleen?
I'm not sure. I think that might be vets. It looks like in the top left corner, but I can't quite see. But yeah,
Okay.
there was a previous slide that had National Black too. So yeah, we do like to support you. We will have snacks and things for you to drink. So we'll keep you
Yes.
well fed.
We will be the friendly faces. Any other questions, any other parting words from our student panel? I know you all are really busy on your internships, so thank you so much for joining and sharing your insights and perspectives on the career fairs, and really, really appreciate the time that you took to join us today. So thank you, Brandon, Kian, and Abhishek. Any other thoughts, Kathleen? Or again, if anybody has questions, put them in the chat. Otherwise, we're available to answer any questions as you navigate this decision.
I guess we probably should have introduced our colleague Heather as well, who's on the call.
Yes, Heather, introduce yourself.
I was just here for moral support for the panel and for our coaches. Excited to meet all of y'all in person soon. And National Black I Can Attest is one that I've been to before, but with these other conferences, they sound similar in the sense that what's really nice is you do have that community to come back to, gain a little support. And, you know, we typically take everybody out for dinner or drinks or something. So there is some, I know that it's a big financial commitment on the front end when you're looking at it, but it does pay dividends. And I think the panelists could also introduce you to more second years who attended, if you need even more insights when you're making that decision. But I think it's a good memory that everybody has in their pocket afterwards, many weeks afterwards, not immediately afterwards, but later on.
Yeah, for sure. I think the only other thing I really want to stress that I heard from all the panelists really thoroughly today is make sure you do your research. You know, we can't make this decision for you. So hopefully you have kind of a baseline of tools and to really start to think about these things and think which one might be right for you and really do your research before you make your decision. It is a big investment in time and money. So we want to make sure that we're helping you with that decision. But you know, preparation is so key to really make the most of the conference. So that's what I heard from the panelists over and over again today. Preparation is so important. So hopefully this is the start of that for all of you. All right, I don't see any further questions. Sandy, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that we appreciate you all joining this. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or want clarity on any of it. But thanks so much for joining.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.